Hi everyone, welcome back. It's great to see you again. Thanks for taking the class. So let's get started. This first video will be on the pitch deck outline and opening of the pitch. So the first slide I'm going to go over is what I call the best investor pitch deck outline. It's an outline of the entire investor pitch deck from beginning to end, including all of the key slides that you should have in that pitch deck. We're not going to be going over what to include on those slides in this presentation, but all of the videos to follow will include what to include on each of these slides. We'll also be going over the different variations here of different pitch decks that you can create. So for the first slide, the best one to really start off with is your cover slide, and we'll be going over what to include on that. Second will be the elevator pitch slide. How do you make your first impression and getting people familiar with what you're going to be pitching. After that is oftentimes the team slide. On the other hand, if you don't have an impressive team, I would move this slide to after your solution slide to show why you built it and why. For the main reason that when you're giving a presentation, you often have to convince the audience why they should be listening to you. And if you have an impressive team, it's good to say that up front. Be impressive, and then they'll be listening even more. On the other side, if you don't have an impressive team of one that people would think is notable, you may want to jump to the chase and just talk about your solution and then talk about yourself of why you're so great for creating such a great solution first. So you can decide where you put the team slide in your deck, but certainly a good one to include no matter what, just kind of where it is positioned in your deck. After your team slide, we're going to be going over board members and advisors and future hires. And this slide I consider being an optional slide. You could combine it with your team slide or keep it a completely separate slide going over who those key board members are and advisors, and even listing the future hires. If you actually know who those people are going to be, name them and talk about their backgrounds, or being open and showing that you have gaps in your management team, but you're certainly aware of those and you know that you'd like to fill them, and the people that you're pitching may very well know some great candidates for those future hires for you. Next is going over the market opportunity, where we'll be defining the market, the size, and who the real customer is, that target client. Then going over the market problem and current solutions, and as we'll see, oftentimes the current solutions are also the current problems in the marketplace. And after you've really set up now who the customer is, the market that we're going after, and the problem that the market has, it makes sense to follow that up with your solution. And your solution can be a range of slides. It can either be one slide that really consolidates what your solution is, and that's certainly if you're making a much shorter presentation, or you can expand your solution slide to being up to about 5 slides. Again, this is the whole reason of why you're pitching, so you want to put some good focus on it more than the rest of the topics in the presentation. After you go over your solution, it also makes sense to then talk about if you've had any traction or awards with your solution. Have you shown revenue growth? Have you been able to acquire customers, grow your user base? Really, this is your place for bragging rights of saying how good your solution is, either on performance, on growth, or other people are thinking that what you're doing is very cool and impressive. And you can keep that to usually 1 to 3 slides, but also optional. You may not have any traction yet or awards. On the 8th slide, we'll have market fit and competition. This is also an optional slide. It can be explained in slide 5 and 6, or put it here as its own separate slide. And it's important here when you're talking about competition of understanding the difference between market fit and your competitive advantages that you have. Slide 9 for competitive advantages. Again, optional. On slide 10 is your business model. We'll be going over all of the key revenue streams, as well as the following slide, your key expenses. And your business model is, very much made up of two different key components, both those revenue streams and the key expenses and time efforts. And dedicating one slide to each of them makes a lot of sense. Then almost the last slide will be your financial projections, going over typically 1 year up to 5 or 6 years. And I'll be going over what to include on those financial projections, and also some of the red flags that investors often look for. And hopefully the strategy in the end will be to exit, eventually get acquired by a larger company. And discussing who those potential acquirers might be is certainly helpful, not only to identify them, but also identify why they would be acquiring you. And lastly, going over the ask. You're ultimately pitching for a reason. That's usually to raise capital, but sometimes it's also for introductions to clients, to advisors, but there's always an ask. There's a reason of why you're presenting. And after that is the closing slide, where questions will likely begin if the investor has not interrupted you already along the way. But you can now open the whole presentation up for questions. And as you see, this is kind of the general investor pitch deck outline. It has about 15 slides if you kept every slide to one slide. However, if you were to expand on your solution, up to 5 slides, if you were to add more traction slides, up to 3, it ends up certainly becoming more than 15, and it could approach close to 30. But I would recommend not going over 30 slides in your core investor pitch deck. And as I had said in the previous video, there really is no such thing as the right number of slides in a presentation. And there is that rule I've heard in the past that it has to be 10 slides, and it's really not true. There are so many times that entrepreneurs will be asked to present in various slide numbers. So what I created here on the bottom right is a box that shows if you were to create deck variations, which slides to use. For example, if you were creating a 5-slide deck, you should grab slides 4, 5, 6, 2, and potentially combine 10, 12, and 14. If you're creating a 10-slide deck, don't include the optional slides. And if you're creating a 15 to 30 slide deck, do slides 1 through 15, but certainly elaborate a little bit more on your solution. Separate your market size analysis versus understanding who your target client is. Expand on your traction, and a few other places, but it'll end up being somewhere between a 15 to a 30 slide deck. If you hit the kind of 20 to 25 slides, that's usually pretty good for a real in-depth conversation with investors. But typically, a 10-slide deck or up to 15 slides is a really good initial meeting to go over, and then you can create certainly lots of appendix slides that you can hide in the back, which we'll be also going over in a later video. So let's go over the cover slide. The cover slide is your first impression that you'll be having with your investors. And the interesting thing about the cover slide is it really acts as your billboard, right? It's oftentimes up on the screen before you even get up there. And the cover slides often have your logo and the name of the company. Hopefully it has the purpose of the presentation. Likely we'll say investor presentation, not to be confused with client presentation or anything else. So it makes it very clear of why you're presenting, putting that on the front page. Some people put dates on the cover of their presentations, and they even put dates in the file name when they're emailing it. I suggest, I've seen too many problems with entrepreneurs putting dates on PowerPoints and in the file name. Oftentimes it makes the deck, if it hasn't been updated recently, it looks outdated. And maybe you even did update the presentation, but you forgot to update the date. It just puts the entrepreneur at risk of looking outdated or having an extra thing to remember that they're doing. And let's face it, it always takes a lot longer to raise your round than you think it will. Investors know that it takes a long time to raise capital, so you don't want it to stress the point that you've been out there raising capital for 6 months because it's December and your date says June. So I suggest never using a date on the cover slide or in the file name, so to protect yourself as an entrepreneur. Don't make it any easier for me to think that you're not doing a good job as an investor. And then other potential additions, some effective things that I've seen are adding logos of accelerators that you may be part of, awards that you've received, or publications where your company has been featured. If you have a really catchy slogan, add that to the cover slide, and potentially the name of the presenter or the CEO, so we know the name of who's in front of us. Remember, this is the slide that's going to be up there before you start talking. And if you're at a startup investor event, it could be up there for 30 seconds before you get up there. And it's nice to be able to advertise and create a brand for yourself before you even start speaking. People will have an impression of you because they see that you are part of this accelerator or you received that award before you start. So you can really make use of this slide. Here's an example, a company called CareBooker. They have the logo big front and center. Below that, it says investor presentation. And you can see below they have logos of various events that they've been selected to speak at, as well as an accelerator program called Lean Launch Ventures that they were part of. So again, it becomes their billboard before they go up. For the next slide is really probably the next most important one, is your elevator pitch slide. Really your first impressions that you're building with your audience. And oftentimes I find entrepreneurs have a very hard time creating a very succinct elevator pitch slide. They put a lot usually on this slide and they clutter it up. And ideally, you want to get to a one-liner that's super easy to read. Hopefully it's not 3 lines, but really try to get to 1 line. And hopefully you can also present that elevator pitch with some images to help explain it. And the 3 ultimate things that you're trying to get across in this tightly bound amount of text or images is 1, what is the business? What is the service or product that you're selling? And how does that solve a core problem? Hopefully it is a significant problem and it's a pain that people can really feel in the marketplace, and how your solution is solving that. And ultimately, after explaining both of those, it should end with something that goes into a vision, a big thing of what you're ultimately looking to become and what that ultimate solution is for your customers or users. So again, don't focus so much on what you are today, but really focus on what you're trying to become in that elevator pitch slide. Here's an example from CareBookers. Says up front, what is CareBooker? It's the main question that everyone is asking themselves at the start of the presentation. And they sum it up pretty nicely with both graphics and a one-liner. It says, the central platform to find, book, and pay for all in-home family care services. And so when you think about that elevator pitch right there is really, in some ways, their mission statement. It's what they currently do for their customers as being that central platform to find, book, and pay. And the vision is really represented by the bottom part of being the Expedia for family care, using an analogy to other well-known companies can often help people figure out what the value proposition is. You clearly know it's a booking and paying platform if you are familiar with Expedia. The only thing I would warn is I've seen startups really go overboard in using analogies to other companies. They'll say, we are the Airbnb meets Expedia meets Pinterest. And investors and everyone else in the audience have no clue what you're talking about. So if you are going to use analogies, please keep it to one, and one that most people know. It's also no use to you as the entrepreneur if you're making an analogy to a company that no one's heard of. So keep it very obvious on the reason of why you are using that analogy, and also make sure that that company has a relatively positive opinion amongst most people that you're presenting to. You don't want to attach yourself to something that has a negative brand or negative connotations to it. So keep things positive with that analogy and make it work for you and not against you.